images, no distractions, just rain or fire sounds, and a story. This narration is designed to help you relax, drift, or disappear into the dark. If you're still awake, comment below. What country are you listening from? And is this your bedtime? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future nights like this. The first time Melissa saw it, she thought it was a tree branch, a trick of the sodium lamps that lined Maple Street in Culver City. Californiathos, old amber lights that turned whole blocks into a sepia photograph after midnight. She was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a wine glass she'd left from the dinner party 3 nights ago. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered in the basin, not from surprise, from the certainty that something had just moved through her backyard, not walking, but sliding sideways, like a shadow cut loose from its owner. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared at the spot where the shape had been, waiting for her brain to offer a rational explanation. It never came. Melissa told herself it was exhaustion. She'd been working 60-hour weeks, selling homes in the West Side corridor, showing families the same 3-bedroom bungalows until the floor plans blended together. Her flaw with one her ex-husband always pointed out was that she trusted too easily. She believed people when they said the inspection was clean, believed sellers when they swore the foundation was solid. And now she was believing her own tired brain when it tried to explain away a neighbor's silhouette as a trick of the light. But at 3:17 a.m., when she walked from the kitchen to the bathroom, she saw it again, a tall, thin figure at the end of the hall, standing just beyond the cone of the nightlight. She froze. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, absorbing the dim glow like a black hole pulls in light. Melissa Hart, 34 years old, divorced for 2 years, had built her life around predictability. Her real estate license hung framed in her home office, a testament to a decade of working through weekends and late nights. She'd bought the house on Maple Street 3 months ago, a fixer-upper from the 1950s with original hardwood floors and a backyard that backed onto a greenbelt. It was supposed to be her fresh start. The cul-de-sac was quiet. Her neighbors, the Yangs and the Pattersons, were retirees who waved from their porches. Nothing ever happened on Maple Street. That was the selling point. She'd closed the deal herself, shaking the seller's hand, a widower named Gerald, who'd lived there 40 years. He'd looked at her with strange, hollow eyes and said, "You'll be happy here. The house is peaceful." She should have asked what he meant by that. The second week, Melissa started noticing gaps. Nothing alarming at first, just the sensation of being watched when she was alone. She'd turn around and find the hallway empty. She'd pause mid-conversation on the phone and realize she was staring at the back door. Her therapist told her it was post-divorce anxiety, the brain's way of hypervigilance after betrayal. Melissa wanted to believe that. She even made a list of rational explanations. The house settling, a neighbor's dog, the motion sensor light tripping from a falling branch. But the pattern grew. Every night, between 3:15 and 3:20 a.m., something would stand at the far end of the hallway. She never saw it fully. Just a tall, dark shape, slightly taller than a door frame, with no discernible features. It never moved toward her. It never made a sound. It simply stood there, watching, until she blinked and it was gone. Melissa bought a security camera. 3 of them, actually. She installed one over the back door, one on the garage, and one in the hallway. For 3 nights, the footage showed nothing. Just the same empty spaces, the same stillness. On the 4th night, she reviewed the hallway feed from 3:17 a.m. The camera had recorded a perfectly empty hallway, but she had stood there, wide awake, and watched a shadow pour itself into the shape of a man. She called her friend Rachel, who worked in digital forensics. Rachel spent an hour analyzing the footage. There's a static artifact, she said. A tiny glitch. Could be a moth near the lens, or a dust particle reflecting the infrared. Melissa knew it wasn't dust. She knew because that night, when she went to bed, she felt a cold hand rest on her ankle through the blanket. She didn't look down. She lay frozen, praying it was her imagination. When she finally forced herself to look, the room was empty. The thing about slow dread is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors or write on walls. It simply erodes the edges of your certainty until you're not sure what's real anymore. Melissa started sleeping with the lights on. She started drinking wine earlier in the evening, hoping the alcohol would thicken her sleep. It didn't. Every night at 3:17, she woke up, not with a start, but gently, as if something had whispered her name. She would open her eyes and see the shadow standing at the foot of her bed. It was closer now. Still no feature rest, just a tall, human-shaped void against the wall. But she could sense its attention. It was waiting for something. She began leaving offerings. A glass of water on the nightstand. A piece of bread. She told herself it was absurd. But the next morning, the water was gone, and the bread had crumbs on the floor. She rationalized. She must have drunk it in her sleep. The crumbs were from her own hands. At work, Melissa became obsessed with the house's history. She pulled the old listing, the deed records, the county assessor's file. Gerald had bought the property in 1983 with his wife, Alina. They'd raised 2 children there, both now living out of state. Alina died in 2019. Gerald sold the house 6 months later. On paper, it was a clean story, but Melissa noticed something in the old photographs from the listing. In the corner of a living room shot, a dark patch that wasn't quite shadow. She zoomed in, adjusting the brightness, and felt her stomach drop. It had the same shape as the figure in her hallway. She called Gerald's son, a man named Jason who lived in Seattle. Did your dad ever mention anything strange about the house? She asked. There was a long pause. Why are you asking? Jason said, because I see something at night, she admitted. A tall shadow. Jason was quiet for a long moment. My mother used to call it the watching one. She said it never hurt her, but it never left her alone either. Jason told Melissa that his mother had become reclusive in the final years of her life. She stopped leaving the house. She insisted on sleeping with the bedroom door open. She told her son that the shadow was a guardian, but also a warden. She died in that room, Jason said, and in the last months, she said it stood beside her bed every night, not threatening, just present, like it was waiting. Melissa asked what it was waiting for. I don't know, Jason replied. But when Dad sold the house, he told me he'd never felt more relieved. That night, Melissa didn't sleep. She sat in the living room with all the lights on, watching the hallway from a distance. At 3:17, the shadow appeared. But this time, it didn't stop at the hallway. It crossed the threshold into the living room. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a creature learning to walk. And for the first time, Melissa heard something. A breath, not hers. A low, vibrating exhale that seemed to come from inside her own chest. Melissa started recording. Every night, she set up her phone on a tripod aimed at the hallway. Every morning, she checked the footage. The first few nights showed only blackness. The cameras, infrared, struggled to capture the shape. But on the 5th night, she saw something. A flicker in the static. The shadow was visible for exactly 3 frames. 3 frames out of 30 per second. She captured it as a screenshot and enhanced the contrast. There it was, a tall, thin figure with impossibly long arms and no head. No head. She zoomed in, her mouse hovering over the screen. The figure's torso ended in a smooth, rounded top. She showed the image to Rachel, who couldn't explain it. It's a lens flare, Rachel said, but her voice wavered. Or a reflection of something in the room. Melissa knew it wasn't. She knew because the shadow had started leaving marks, small dents in the floorboards, as if something heavy had been standing in the same spot for hours. She measured them. They were exactly where the shadow stopped each night. Think about this: if you found 3 deep impressions in your floorboards, exactly where a shadow stood every night, would you keep calling it a hallucination? By this point, Melissa had stopped telling her therapist about the shadow. She stopped sleeping altogether. She would doze in short intervals on the couch, always facing the hallway. She noticed the shadow was getting bolder. It no longer disappeared when she turned on a light. Instead, it would dim slightly, like a stain that refused to lift. One afternoon, she searched online for similar stories. She found a forum dedicated to shadow figures. Hundreds of threads, thousands of testimonies. Most described a dark humanoid shape, often seen at night, often in the periphery. But a few mentioned something else a specific time, 3:17 a.m., the witching hour, they called it. Melissa scrolled through post after post. One user wrote, "It stood at my bed for months. Then one night it spoke. Not words, a feeling. It wanted me to follow." The thread ended abruptly. The user never posted again. Melissa drove to the Culver City Public Library and pulled microfilm records from the 1980s. She searched for any mention of the house on Maple Street. After 3 hours, she found a small article from the Culver City Star, dated November 12, 1986. Woman reported missing from home on Maple Street. The article said a 32-year-old woman named Margaret Harlow had vanished from the property while her husband was at work. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. The case went cold. Margaret Harlow had lived in the house before Gerald bought it. Melissa cross-referenced the name with property records and found that the Harlow family had sold the house 8 months after Margaret's disappearance. The buyer was Gerald. She called Jason again. "Did your dad know the previous owners?" she asked. Jason hesitated. He never talked about them. But once, when Mom was really sick, she said something strange. She said the shadow liked the house because it had a door that wasn't a door. Melissa went to the basement. She'd never really explored. The space was unfinished, used for storage, with a concrete floor and exposed beams. But now she looked closer. The wall at the far end, behind a stack of boxes, had a strange patch. The paint was a slightly different shade of gray, as if a section had been sealed. She knocked on it. It sounded hollow. With a crowbar she found in the garage, she pried at the edges. The drywall crumbled easily. Behind it there was a door, an old wooden door with a wrought iron handle, painted over many times. Melissa's hands were shaking. She turned the handle. It opened. The space beyond was smaller room about 6 feet by 6 feet, with a dirt floor and walls of raw brick. In the center of the room, scratched into the brick, were hundreds of marks, and at the bottom, written in a shaky hand, "It watches. It waits. It takes the willing." Melissa stood in that hidden room and felt the air grow cold. She counted the tallies. There were thousands of them, spanning decades. The earliest date she could make out was 1952. The most recent was 2019, the year Alina died. She understood then that the shadow was older than the house. It had been here before the foundation was poured. The room was a kind of holding space, a place where the boundary between the living and something else was thin. The marks were anniversaries, dates when someone had felt the shadow's presence, and the name scratched deep into the brickwork, the ones who had followed. Margaret Harlow was there. Alina was there. And at the very bottom, in fresh scratches that gleamed like they'd been made last night, was a name that made Melissa's blood freeze. Melissa H. She didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. She sat in the living room with every light blazing, staring at the open door to the basement. The shadow appeared at 3:17, as always, but this time it didn't stop at the hallway. It walked through the living room, past the couch where Melissa sat rigid, and descended the stairs into the basement. She heard its footsteps on the wooden steps, soft, deliberate, then silence. She forced herself to follow. The basement was dark, but her flashlight showed the door to the hidden room hanging open. She approached slowly. The room was empty, but on the dirt floor there was a fresh footprint, not a shoe printed barefoot, small like a woman's, and beside it another, and another, leading to the back wall, where the brick had crumbled into a gap, a passage, a tunnel that sloped downward into absolute blackness. Melissa felt the draw, the same pull she'd sensed since the key code worked on the first try, which should have felt reassuring. Maya Chen stepped into the foyer of the Hawthorne house and let the door close behind her with a soft, final click. The air smelled of old wood and dried lavender, but underneath, it's something sharper like rust and cold ash. She set her suitcase down and glanced at the entrance hall mirror. It showed her own tired face, the floral wallpaper behind her, and a doorway to the parlor. Nothing else. She scrolled through the Airbnb listing on her phone one more time, confirming the instructions. The host, a woman named Clara, had sent a long message about respecting the antique furnishings and not opening certain cabinets. Maya assumed it was just eccentricity. The house was cheap for the area, which was the whole reason Shed booked it. A week-long retreat to finish a client project in peace. But standing there in the silence, She felt the quiet push against her ears like water pressure. She told herself it was just the strangeness of a new place. Then the candle on the hall table guttered and relit itself, flame steady and tall. She stared at it for too long before deciding it must have been a draft. She decided to make tea to settle her nerves. The kitchen was at the back of the house, narrow and lined with cabinets painted a faded sage. The appliances looked original to the 1920s, except a new electric kettle plugged into a dusty outlet while filling the kettle at the farmhouse sink. Maya noticed the window above it was fogged with condensation. Even though the kitchen was cool, she wiped a circle in the glass and saw the backyard. Overgrown grass, a stone well covered with a rusted grate, and a single wooden chair facing the house. The chair was empty, but the seat appeared worn, as if someone sat there often. She turned away and opened the nearest cupboard for a teacup. Inside were rows of porcelain dolls, all facing outward, their glass eyes catching the buzzing light. Each one wore a different dress, but they shared the same painted smile and the same crack running from temple to jaw. Maya's hand froze. She closed the cupboard door slowly, then checked the other cabinets. All of them held nothing but dishes and dry goods. She forced a laugh and chalked it up to the owner's collection. But when she finally sat at the table with her tea, she noticed the doll's cupboard door had swung open again without a sound. Maya had chosen this errand because she needed distance from her life in Austin, Texas. At 28, she was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home, which meant she rarely left her apartment. Her flaw, she acknowledged, but never corrected, was a tendency to ignore red flags when a situation seemed convenient. The listing for the Hawthorne house had been half the price of comparable rentals in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. The reviews were all 5 stars, but when she read them closely, they repeated the same phrases. Unique atmosphere, very quiet, respect the house rules. No one mentioned the dolls. No one mentioned the smell. But Maya needed affordable solitude to meet a deadline. And the Victorian architecture appealed to her aesthetic sense. She unpacked her bag in the master bedroom, a large room with a 4-poster bed and a ceiling stained with a watermark that vaguely resembled a human face. She told herself it was shaped like a cloud, not a face, and that she was being dramatic. She set up her laptop on the vanity table and began to work, but she kept glancing at the door. It was slightly ajar, and the hallway beyond was dark. She got up and closed it, turning the old brass lock. The click was satisfying. She sat back down and opened her project file. From the hallway, she heard a single, deliberate knock. Maya's fingers paused on the keyboard. The knock was not at the front door, it was too close, too muffled, coming from somewhere inside the house. She stood and pressed her ear to the bedroom door. She unlocked it and peered into the hallway. The light at the far end, near the stairs, was on, though she was certain she hadn't turned it on. The bulb in the sconce seemed lower than before, casting a jaundiced glow on the floral wallpaper. She called out a hesitant hello and heard only the ticking of a grandfather clock she hadn't noticed earlier. She walked to the stair landing and looked down into the foyer. The front door was still closed, locked, but the mirror in the hall, one shed checked on arrival now, had a crack running diagonally across its surface. The crack had not been there before. She stared at her own reflection, split down the middle, and felt a cold draft wrap around her ankles. She hurried back to the bedroom and locked the door again. This time, she pressed a chair against it. Her heart was beating hard, but she told herself the house was old, settling, full of noises and drafts. She opened her phone and messaged the host, Clara, asking if anyone else might be in the house. The reply came within seconds. No, the house is old and talks a lot. Try not to answer. Maya stared at the message. Try not to answer. She typed back, answer what? But the host did not respond again. Night came slowly to the hollows of Eureka Springs. Maya had closed all the curtains and turned on every light she could find. But the old bulbs only pushed back the darkness a little. She sat in the parlor with her laptop, working on a logo redesign. But her focus fractured every time a floorboard creaked. She started a voice memo on her phone to document her experience, a habit from her college days. She spoke quietly, describing the doll cupboard, the crack in the mirror, the knock. She told herself she was overreacting, that the cheap rental had quirks, that she would leave in the morning if it got worse. But even as she said it, she knew she wouldn't deposit was non-refundable, and she had nowhere else to go. Around midnight, she decided to sleep. She took the chair from under the bedroom door handle and crawled into the four-poster bed with her phone flashlight on. The ceiling stain seemed darker now, more defined. She turned over to face the wall. That's when she heard footsteps on the stairs. One step, then a pause. Another step. The sound traveled from the second floor down to the first, then stopped. Maya held her breath. The footsteps started again, climbing back up. She grabbed her phone and dialed the local police non-emergency number. It rang twice and went to a recording. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. Otherwise, leave a message and we will return your call within 24 hours. She hung up, realizing she could not prove anything. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and then fell silent. She heard her whisper a single word, drawn out, almost musical. Her name. She was sure of it. She didn't sleep. She sat upright against the headboard until the first gray light filtered through the curtains. Her phone battery was dead. Shed used it as a flashlight all night. When the sun finally rose, she felt a ridiculous relief, as if daylight alone could banish whatever had whispered her name. She unlocked the bedroom door and went downstairs. The house looked ordinary in the morning dusty, but harmless. The mirror was cracked. The dolls were still in their cupboard, but now the door was closed. She decided to investigate the house more thoroughly. In the study, a small room off the parlor, she found a built-in bookshelf filled with old volumes. One book was lying on the floor, open to a middle page. She picked it up and saw an antique photograph of a woman in a high-collared dress. The woman's eyes were large and dark, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Below the photograph, a caption in cursive: Clara Hawthorne, 1887. The same name as the host. Maya turned to the title page. The Hawthorne Family, a history of the house and its inhabitants. She skimmed the pages. The house had been built in 1873 by a timber baron named Josiah Hawthorne. He lived there with his wife, Clara, and their 2 children. In 1889, Clara Hawthorne died by suicide in the master bedroom. The method was a self-inflicted bullet wound. The entry noted that she had been troubled by melancholic visions in the months before her death. Josiah remarried and sold the house in 1892. The rest of the book detailed later owners, all of whom reported strange occurrences doors opening on their own. A woman weeping in the attic, cold spots near the staircase. Maya closed the book and set it on the desk. The host's name was Clara. She found it on Linnea, young woman in her 30s, smiling in a profile photo with a tagline: "Hospitality is my passion." Maya sent another message. "Did you know your name matches the original owner?" The reply came instantly. "Yes, I chose the name for the account. It's a tribute." That made sense, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the reply had come too fast, as if someone had been waiting for her to ask. The book had mentioned an attic, and Maya had not explored the upper floor fully. There was a small door at the end of the upstairs hallway, painted to match the wall, almost invisible. The knob turned easily. Inside, a pull-down ladder descended from a ceiling hatch. She tugged the cord, and the ladder unfolded with a groan. She grabbed her phone charger from the bedroom, had plugged it in, and now it had enough battery to serve as a torch. She climbed the ladder into the attic. The space was low and cramped, filled with dust and the smell of dry rot. Trunks and boxes were stacked along the eaves. A single bare bulb hung from the rafters, but the pull chain snapped when she tried to use it, leaving her in the light of her phone. She swept the beam across the floor. In the center, a wooden rocking chair sat facing a small writing desk. On the desk was a leather-bound journal, open to an entry. She knelt and read by flashlight. The handwriting was elegant, looping. November 4, 1888. He will not let me leave. He stands at the foot of the bed every night. His eyes are black. I tried to tell the doctor, but Josiah says I am hysterical. I am not. I see him. He wants the house. He wants me. The entry stopped. The next page was blank. The rest of the journal was filled with similar entries, each one shorter, more desperate. The final entry, dated February 12, 1889, read only. He gave me the gun. I will do it in the room. He will be satisfied. Maya dropped the journal. The dust swirled in her flashlight beam. She heard the ladder creak behind her. Someone else had entered the attic. Maya scrambled backward, hitting her head on a low rafter. The ladder was still there, empty. No one was ascending. The creak had come from the ladder, under her weight shifting her. So she told herself. But the space felt different now, heavier. She got to her feet and aimed the phone light at the ladder. She took a breath and climbed down, pulling the hatch closed behind her. She stood in the hallway, heart pounding, journal still in her hand. She hadn't realized she'd taken it. She brought it to the kitchen and laid it on the table. Then she called her friend Leo in Austin. It went to voicemail. She left a message. I am at this creepy Airbnb in Eureka Springs. Something's wrong. I think the ghost of Clara Hawthorne is still here. Or maybe the host is playing games. I don't know. Call me when you get this. She hung up and opened her laptop to look up the host's full identity. The Airbnb profile was minimal verified ID. 3 years on the platform, 27 reviews. But the host name, Clara, could be a pseudonym. Maya searched the property address in public records. The house was owned by a limited liability company called Lost Pine Properties. The registered agent was a woman named Alina Vance, no relation to the name Clara. She tried to call the number listed for Lost Pine Properties. It rang and rang. Then a robotic voice said the number was no longer in service. Think about this if you were alone in that house, with a journal that described a malevolent presence, and the host you couldn't reach. What would you do? Maya decided to leave. She packed her bag in less than 10 minutes, shoving clothes and electronics into the suitcase without folding. She didn't bother with the deposit. She needed to be out of that house. She heard a thump from upstairs. As she zipped the bag closed, she ignored it. She carried the suitcase down the stairs and set it by the front door. She unlocked the deadbolt and turned the knob. The door did not open. She turned the knob again, harder. The note was stuck to the inside of my coffee mug. Not the counter, not the cabinet inside the mug. Pressed flat against the porcelain. Written in blue ink, so fresh it smeared when I touched it. I hadn't used that mug in 3 days. I'd been alone in this house the entire time. The locks on the doors were deadbolts. The windows had sensors. I installed myself after the divorce. Every night for 8 months, I checked every closet, every crawl space, every blind spot before I went to sleep. And still, someone had opened my cabinet, lifted my mug, placed a note inside, and put it back. The message said 3 words. You forgot again. I didn't know what that meant, but my hands started shaking before my brain caught up to why. I called the police. 2 officers arrived 40 minutes later. A man and a woman who wrote down everything with patient faces I didn't trust. They checked the doors. They checked the windows. They found no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the garden beds, no smudges on the window frames. The female officer asked if I'd been sleeping well. I told her I'd been sleeping fine. She asked if I'd written the note myself and forgotten. I told her I didn't own blue pens. She asked if I could think of anyone who might want to frighten me. That question hung in the air longer than it should have. My ex-husband lived in Seattle. My mother was in a facility outside Salem. I didn't have friends who visited. I had coworkers who didn't know my address. The male officer suggested I install cameras. I already had cameras. My name is Lauren Voss. I'm 34 years old, a technical writer for a medical software company based in Portland, Oregon. The neighborhood is called Irvington. Historic homes with tall windows and oak trees that canopy the streets. I moved here 2 years ago after the divorce. Bought the house with money my grandmother left me because I wanted something solid, something that couldn't be taken. I'm the kind of person who organizes her spice rack alphabetically. I keep a spreadsheet for my grocery budget. I log my sleep hours in an app. Control has never been a preference for mate survival. My father was an alcoholic who came home unpredictable. My mother coped by pretending nothing was wrong. I learned early that if I could control my environment, I could control my fear. So when I saw that note in my mug, my first instinct wasn't panic. It was investigation. I reviewed every camera feed from the past 72 hours. 3 cameras covered the front porch, back door, and hallway. I watched myself come home from work, make dinner, shower, sleep. I watched myself leave for the gym, return with groceries, water the plants on the porch. No one else appeared on any of the footage. Not a shadow, not a shape, not a flicker of motion at the edges. The note had simply materialized. I spent that night on the couch, laptop open, rewatching the same segments until my eyes burned. At 2:47 a.m., I caught something. Not an intruder gap. On the hallway camera, there was a 17-second period where the timestamp jumped forward. The footage hadn't been deleted. It had been spliced. Someone had clipped out 17 seconds and stitched the feed together seamlessly. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been looking for exactly that kind of glitch. The next morning, I found a second note. This one was tucked inside my pillowcase. I'd slept on the couch, so I hadn't touched my bed. The note said, "You checked the cameras. Good girl." I called the police again. They came again. They found nothing again. The same female officer pulled me aside and told me gently that I should consider seeing a doctor, that stress could manifest in strange ways. She meant I was losing my mind. I didn't lose my mind. I lost my sense of safety. That night, I did something I hadn't done. Since I was 12 years old, I checked every room in the house with a knife in my hand. I opened the closets. I looked under the beds. I opened the basement door and stood at the top of the stairs, listening to the hum of the furnace, the creak of old wood settling. Nothing moved, but when I went back to the kitchen to put the knife away, there was a third note on the counter, held down by a salt shaker I kept in the cabinet above the stove. I stopped sleeping, not in the dramatic sense I still lay down, still closed my eyes, but my body refused to let go. Every creak, every shift of the house, every distant car on Northeast Broadway sent adrenaline through my chest like a wire pulled tight. I started sleeping with the lights on. I started leaving the television running. I called my ex-husband in Seattle and asked if he'd ever experienced anything strange in the house. He laughed. He said the house had always been fine, that maybe I was just having a hard time adjusting to being alone. Then he asked if I'd met anyone. I hung up. I called my mother at the facility. She didn't recognize my voice. She thought I was her sister, who died in 2003. The loneliness of that conversation pressed down on my chest like something physical. When I came home that evening, the front door was unlocked. I stood on the porch for 6 minutes before I went inside. Every instinct told me to run, to call the police, to go to a hotel and never come back. But the notes had been inside, The locked doors had been opened. Whoever this was, they weren't waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for me to come home. I pushed the door open slowly. The hallway was empty. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. But on the dining table, arranged in a perfect circle, were 9 notes. Each one had been folded into a small square. I opened the first one. I know you count your steps. The second, I know you check the locks 3 times. The third, I know you didn't cry at your father's funeral. I stopped reading. I backed out of the house and called the police from the porch. They found no one. They found no evidence. They found 9 notes written in blue ink on yellow paper, all of which had my fingerprints and no one else's. The detective assigned to the case was a man named Harold Cressy, 58 years old, 22 years on the force, the kind of tired that comes from seeing too much. He sat in my living room and told me, as gently as he could, that the notes had no prints besides mine, that the cameras showed no intrusion, that the front door lock appeared to have been manipulated from the inside. He asked me if I'd ever sleepwalked. I said no. He asked if I'd ever experienced dissociative episodes. I said no. He asked if there was anyone I trusted enough to stay with for a few days. I said I didn't have anyone. He wrote that down. I watched his pen move across the paper and realized he was building a case file about me, not about the person breaking into my home. He thought I was the one leaving the notes. He thought I was the danger in my own house. And the worst part was, I didn't know for certain he was wrong. That night, I did something I told myself I would never do. I set up my phone to record myself sleeping. I propped it on the nightstand, pressed record, and lay down in bed with my eyes open for hours. At some point, I must have drifted off, because when I woke up, the room was dark and the phone had stopped recording. The battery was dead. I plugged it in and waited. While it charged, I found a 4th note on my bedside table, placed neatly beside the lamp. It said, "You fell asleep at 3:12 a.m. You dreamed about your father. You woke up at 5:47 a.m. Don't worry, I watched over you." I didn't call the police. I didn't call anyone. I sat on my bathroom floor with the lights on and tried to remember if I'd ever told anyone about my father. I hadn't. Not my ex-husband, not my coworkers, not a single person in Portland. The only person who knew what he'd done to me was my mother, and she couldn't remember my name. Think about this if that happened to you. What would you do? I spent the next 3 days refusing to leave the house. I called in sick to work. I disconnected the doorbell. I boarded up the basement door with 2x4s I bought from the Home Depot on Northeast 122nd. I checked the attic. I checked the crawl space. I found nothing. No hidden rooms. No old tunnels. No evidence that anyone had ever lived in the walls. The house was a standard 1920s craftsman. Single family. No secrets. But the notes kept appearing. One in the shower caddy. One in the pocket of my coat. One slipped inside the pages of a book I hadn't opened in 6 months. Each one referenced something private, something I had never spoken aloud, something I had only thought, and I began to ask myself the question I had been avoiding. What if the intruder wasn't coming from outside? What if the intruder was already inside and had always been inside, and I had simply never noticed? On the 4th day, I found the crawlspace access. It was hidden behind a false panel in the back of the master closet, behind my winter coats, behind boxes of Christmas decorations I hadn't touched since the move. The panel wasn't nailed shut. It swung open easily, revealing a dark square in the floor, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, with a ladder bolted to the inside. I had lived in this house for 2 years and never known this existed. The real estate disclosure had mentioned nothing. The inspection had missed it. I shone a flashlight into the hole and saw a room beneath my house. A finished room. Concrete floor, drywalled walls, a bed, a desk, a lamp, a small refrigerator, and on the desk, arranged in neat rows, were dozens of yellow sticky notes, waiting for the next thing I thought, waiting for me to give them words. I didn't go down there. I sat on the edge of my bed, with my flashlight aimed at the hole, and my phone clutched in my hand, and I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The room was clean, lived in. There was a stack of books on the desk, books. Books I had donated to the library 6 months ago. There was a photograph taped to the wall. It was me, in my kitchen, holding a coffee mug. I didn't recognize the angle. It had been taken from inside the pantry. I had never noticed. I started shaking, not the kind of shaking that comes from cold, but the kind that comes from the body realizing something the brain hasn't caught up to yet. Someone had been living beneath my house. For how long, I didn't know, but they knew my routines, my thoughts, my fears. They had been watching me sleep. They had been reading my mail. They had been inside my head. I called Detective Cressy. He arrived 30 minutes later with 2 officers and a forensic team. They descended into the crawlspace room while I sat on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the neighbors pretend not to stare. When Cressy came back up, his face was different, not afraid and settled. He told me the room had been there for a long time, possibly since the house was built. The bed was old, military style. The desk was bolted to the floor. The books were arranged by genre. The notes were blank, but there was something else. A journal hidden under the mattress. It contained entries dated back to 1923. Same handwriting throughout. The first entry read, "I have found my place. They will never know I am here. I will watch them come and go. I will learn their secrets. I will keep them safe from themselves." The last entry was dated 3 days ago. It read, "She is the most interesting one. She is close. She almost came down tonight. I left the door open for her. She will come. They always come." The forensic team searched every inch of that room. They found no fingerprints besides mine and the officers. They found no DNA. They found no evidence that anyone had been in that room for decades, except for the fresh dust disturbed by the bed, the lamp that was still warm when they touched it, and a single strand of hair on the pillow that was a perfect match for my own. I had never been in that room. I had never known it existed, but my hair was on the pillow. I stood in the kitchen while they worked and tried to remember every night I had slept in this house, every time I had woken. Daniel Keller's phone should have been charging. Instead, it lay face up on the nightstand, casting a cold blue glow across the bedroom. The notification was timestamped 3:17 a.m. 9 minutes ago. A single line of text from the Nest Security app reading, "Front door motion detected." Daniel hadn't moved. He stared at the screen, then at the door. It was closed. The deadbolt was thrown. He checked it twice before bed, because that's what you do when you live alone in a rental in southeast Portland, near the intersection of 82nd and Foster. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous, not really, but the house was old and the locks were flimsy. He thumbed the app open, his thumbprint sliding across the glass. The live feed from the front door camera loaded in chunks, pixelating, then clearing. There was nothing there, just the porch, the rain, the single yellow bulb. But the app insisted, motion sensed. He turned the phone over, checked the history. The same thing had happened 3 nights ago, and 5 nights before that. Daniel set the phone down. He waited. The house settled around him. The old bones of a 1920s craftsman groaning as the temperature dropped. The heater kicked on in the basement. He listened to the hum, the rattle of ducts, the soft percussion of rain against the window. Then he heard it a click, the kind of sound a door makes when it isn't properly shut, and airflow pushes it open. He turned toward the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar now. He closed it. He knew he closed it. Daniel Keller was a 31-year-old data analyst for a cybersecurity firm in the Pearl District. He spent his days tracking pattern anomalies. He did not leave doors open. He did not misplace his keys. He triple-checked everything because his entire professional identity was built on catching what other people missed. And right now, the pattern was wrong. The motion alerts had started 12 days ago, the day after Hidi moved in. Hidi assumed it was a glitch, but glitches didn't only happen when he was home. Glitches didn't wait until he was asleep. The move had been impulsive. Daniel's lease in the Belmont district had ended, and his landlord had jacked the rent by $400. Hidi found this place on Craigslist, a month-to-month sublet in the MT, Scott-Arletta neighborhood, furnished, utilities included, $250 a month less than his old apartment. The listing photos had been blurry, but the price was right. The owner was a woman named Alina, who claimed she was relocating to Eugene for a teaching fellowship. She'd never shown up in person. A locksmith had left the key under a ceramic frog by the front step, and Daniel had signed the agreement digitally. The house smelled of lavender and dust, and the furniture was dated floral upholstery, oak veneer, a grandfather clock that didn't work. The previous tenant had left behind a few items. A stack of paperback thrillers, a crusted coffee mug in the sink, a child's crayon drawing taped to the pantry door. Daniel had thrown the mug away. Hidi kept the crayon drawing a stick figure standing next to a house with no windows, because it felt wrong to discard something made by a kid. He didn't know if the kid was Alina's, or the previous tenants, or neither. The house didn't offer answers. On the third night, Daniel had traced the motion alerts to a single camera. The front door, the backyard camera, the living room sensor, the basement door contact, all showed nothing. But the front door logged motion every time. He walked through the house with his phone, tapping the floor plan. The dot blinked red near the front entrance. He stood there, barefoot on the worn hardwood, and looked at the door. The bolt was thrown. The chain was on. The window beside the door was painted shut. Layers of lead-based enamel sealing the frame. No one could open it without breaking glass. He checked the camera history anyway. The feed from 2 nights ago showed static. 2 minutes of grainy black and white footage where nothing moved. Then the timestamp jumped. A gap. He replayed it 3 times. The video skipped from 2:47 a.m. to 3:19 a.m. A 32-minute lacuna that the system hadn't flagged. He ran a diagnostic check on the Nest hub. The logs showed no reboot, no firmware update, no loss of Wi-Fi. The gap was a cut, not a dropout. Someone had edited the feed, or something had. The next morning, Daniel examined the front door lock with a jeweler's loop, a tool he borrowed from the office without returning 3 years ago. The brass was worn, the keyhole scratched. Not unusual for an old house, but the scratches were uniform, parallel, like the marks left by a tool that fit perfectly. A lockpick set. He photographed them. He sent the images to a locksmith friend named Rico in Seattle. Rico wrote back, "That's not where. That's raking. Someone's been in your lock. Probably multiple times. Install a smart deadbolt with tamper alerts." Daniel bought one that afternoon at the Home Depot on 82nd. He installed it himself, running the wiring through the existing hole, programming a 6-digit code. The old deadbolt went into a cardboard box in the closet. That night, he set 3 new cameras inside the house. One in the hallway, one in the kitchen, one aimed at the basement stairs. He also placed a voice recorder on the coffee table, the kind journalists used for interviews. He fell asleep to the sound of rain and the hum of an unknown house. At 2:14 a.m., the voice recorder captured something. Daniel didn't hear it until the next morning. He overslept, his alarm failing to penetrate the thick sleep of exhaustion. When he finally woke, the sun was high and the house was warm. He made coffee. He sat down. He pressed play on the recorder. For the first 40 minutes, there was nothing but ambient noise. The refrigerator cycling, the tick of the grandfather clock, the faint creak of the house settling. Then, at the 42nd minute, a voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. It was muffled, as if spoken through a wall or a closed door. Daniel turned the volume up. He pressed the speaker to his ear. The voice said 5 words. He listened to them 7 times before he wrote them down. He doesn't know I am here. The voice was female and flat, not a leaner. He didn't know who it belonged to. He checked the camera footage from the same time. The hallway camera showed an empty corridor. The kitchen camera showed an empty kitchen. The voice recorder sat on the coffee table, alone in the dark. No shadow crossed it. No hand touched it. The voice came from somewhere the cameras couldn't see. Daniel spent the afternoon mapping the house's layout against the floor plan he'd been sent. The plan showed a finished basement with a bedroom and bathroom. The actual basement was unfinished dirt floor, fieldstone foundation, a single bare bulb dangling from a wire. The discrepancy bothered him. He measured the square footage. The house was listed at 1,800 square feet. His tape measure gave him 1,450. 350 square feet had gone missing. He checked the walls. The pantry wall at the back of the kitchen was thicker then it should be 14 inches instead of 6. He knocked on it. The sound was solid, not hollow, not drywall. The pantry shelves were nailed into place, the wood dark with age. He removed the shelves. Behind them was a wall of painted-over wallpaper. The pattern old faded roses climbing a trellis. He pressed his ear against it. He heard nothing, but he felt cold radiating from the surface. A steady chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He pried at the wallpaper with a putty knife. Underneath, he found a door. The door was 4 feet tall, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. It had no handle, just a keyhole. The brass plate tarnished to black. The keyhole was empty. Daniel pressed his weight against the door. It didn't budge. He tried the crowbar from his tool bag, wedging it into the gap between door and frame. The wood groaned but held. He stepped back. The door was locked from the inside. He could have called a locksmith. He should have called the police. Instead, he went to the basement. He found a crawl space access panel in the ceiling above the water heater. He dragged a stepladder over, climbed up, and pushed the panel open. The darkness inside was absolute. He shone his phone light into the gap. The crawl space continued past the expected wall line, extending into the space that the floor plan had erased. He crawled in. The insulation was old, fiberglass batting, covered in decades of dust. His knees pressed into the joists. He moved forward, the light wobbling, the air growing colder. At the end of the crawl space, he found a room. Think about this. If you found a secret room in your house, would you keep going? Or would you turn back? The room was maybe 10 feet by 10. A child's bed stood against the far wall. The frame cast iron. The mattress stained and sunken. A stuffed rabbit with one button eye sat on the pillow, facing the door. A rocking chair in the corner. A small desk with a lamp. The bulb shattered. The walls were papered in the same faded rose pattern. The floor was bare wood, warped by moisture. There was no door from this side, just a blank wall where the door should have been. The entrance was sealed. He entered through the crawl space. Daniel stood in the center of the room. The temperature was at least 15 degrees colder than the rest of the house. His breath misted. He looked at the child's desk. On it lay a notebook, the pages yellowed and curled. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was a child's large, unsteady. The letters pressed hard into the paper. The first page read, "My name is Lucy. I am 8. My mother says I am sick. She says I cannot go outside. I do not feel sick. I feel fine. But she locks the door anyway." Daniel turned the page. The next entry, dated 3 months later, said, "The man comes at night. He is not my father. He comes through the wall. I hear him before I see him. He smells like wet dirt. He calls me by another name. Daniel read the entire notebook, standing in that cold room. 37 entries, spanning 11 months. Lucy wrote about the man who came through the wall. She wrote about how her mother never heard him. She wrote about the smell of wet dirt and the way his voice sounded like gravel rolling downhill. She wrote that he never touched her, but he watched. He sat in the rocking chair and watched. She drew pictures in the margins. A tall, thin figure with no face. Its head tilted at an angle that hurt to look at. The last entry was dated August 14th, 1989. Mother says we are leaving. I asked if the man can come with us. She looked at me strange. She said there is no man. She says there never was. But I see him right now. He is standing behind her, and he is shaking his head. The notebook ended there. No more entries. Daniel looked at the rocking chair. It was still. He felt a pressure in his chest, a weight that made it hard to breathe. He backed out of the room through the crawl space, the notebook clutched in his hand. He did not look back, but he heard something, a soft creak, regular, rhythmic. The rocking chair. Daniel spent the next 3 days researching the house. He found the original building permit from 1921. He found death certificates. He found a 1989 police report filed by a woman named Margaret Hayes, who reported her 8-year-old daughter Lucy missing from the residence. The case was never solved. Lucy was never found. But in the notes, an officer mentioned that the mother seemed confused. She kept insisting that a man had taken Lucy, but she couldn't describe him. She said he came through the wall. She said he smelled like dirt. The case was closed as a runaway. Daniel found Margaret Hayes' obituary 4 years later. Cause of death, heart failure. Age 34. He searched for any other records tied to the address. He found 3 more disappearances between 1935 and 1972. 2 children. 1 adult female. All from this house. All unsolved. He cross-referenced the dates with the motion alerts on his phone. The alerts stopped the day he had entered the hidden room. For 3 nights, nothing. He slept badly, expecting something. Nothing came. On the 4th night, the phone woke him. Basement door opened. He sat up, heart hammering, and looked at the bedroom door. It was closed. He picked up his phone, hand shaking. Thank you for listening. Please leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share this with your friends. Good night and rest well.